Coronavirus put the world on pause. It forced you to think about what you value in life. For me, it came down to 4 things: family, love, community, and health. Now, being an anesthesiologist, you might assume that my definition of health focuses on using modern medicine and science to take care of the mind and the body. But as someone who has studied wellness and spirituality through religion, yoga, sound meditation, acupuncture, and psychedelic therapy, I believe in a broader definition of health. I believe that if you combine modern medicine with wellness and science with spirituality, you can create new tools for healing the ill and bettering the well. What does this term wellness mean to you? Wellness has many definitions. Wellness has devolved into the $4.2 trillion wellness industrial complex. Exponential consumerist growth, coupled with a lack of quality control, invites comparisons to other bloated institutions. Big government, unsustainable agriculture, and profiteering pharma come to mind. Much of wellness is driven by partially alternative and integrative health. A common criticism of those fields is their use of science-ish type language. They use conflated vocabulary to sell stuff. They use buzzwords like pure or clean or natural. They promote ancient or modern remedies as a part of a cleanse to help you live longer. Often their explanations turn into a pseudo-scientific soup of words. They flirt with direct medical claims, taking care to avoid any real medical legal trouble. And they always have something to sell. Wellness is fully commercialized. Even Cosmo magazine has a wellness editor. She's admitted that wellness is used as a label to sell stuff to women. It's a sexy label for health. In recent years, trends have gone from promoting tags like Fitspo or body positivity, and now they're even diving into the world of mental health. Now, it's not all bad. Brands like Goop do introduce people to therapies they might not have considered before. In their recent series on Netflix, Goop discussed the pros and cons of psychedelic therapy. But Goop is also a brand that got fined $150,000 by the FDA for selling a jade egg to women. They encouraged women to put this egg into your vagina to heal your lunar chakra. Not everything in the wellness world is wrong, but people should be aware if something is backed with science or not. We need to bring more science into this conversation. Modern medicine is also getting involved in the world of medicine in wellness. Respected medical institutions like the Cleveland Clinic, Stanford, Harvard have all opened wellness centers. Most of the services they offer are not covered by insurance. You actually have to pay out of pocket. It's fairly lucrative for these institutions. They will admit that while all the services are not necessarily backed by science, as long as it doesn't harm you, they are willing to provide the service. Now, there's also an overall frustration with modern medicine. Doctors can and should talk to their patients about things like exercise, nutrition, mindfulness, but they usually don't. There's a frustrating distance and a lack of personal connection that's been created between patients and their doctors. The typical doctor visit has been shortened to barely a few minutes. Rather than focusing on the patient, most of that time is spent clicking checkboxes on a computer. Pharmaceutical companies have a heavy hand in modern medicine. They're incentivized to push their profit-generating medicines as first-line cures to most medical problems. Furthermore, there's a frustration with the limits of modern medicine. It can only do so much. Some doctors are only willing to go so far. How many of your doctors do you feel comfortable talking to about your orgasm? Would you go and talk to your doctor about your inability to make a breakthrough on your latest creative project? What would it be like to work with someone on some of these important aspects of your life, like your sexuality, like your creativity, using the rigorous lens of modern medical science? When you can't find a practitioner that can help, people often end up feeling invited into the world of medical and wellness conspiracies. The thing about a conspiracy is that the more you are exposed to conspiracy theories, the more those theories are going to stick. It's called the illusory truth effect. We mistake repetition for accuracy. So conspiracy theories are the wheels that churn the wellness industrial complex. Now, as I started, the power drill of modern medicine can be combined with the drill bits of wellness to examine the validity of tools that actually work. The tools of science can help shed light on the seemingly pseudoscientific wellness practices that often invoke an air of spirituality as their credibility. The scientific method was first proposed by Sir Francis Bacon in the 1500s. It was born out of a movement called empiricism. Its core principle is that in order to know something, you must be able to measure it. So the scientific method that we use today focuses on the ability to state a hypothesis or something that you believe to be true. And then you use tools to either prove or disprove the truth of that hypothesis. One of the ultimate forms of the scientific method is the placebo-controlled, double-blind, randomized controlled trial. That's the gold standard of modern medicine. You take a group of people and give half of them a drug or a therapy, give the other half some sort of controlled non-therapy, and then you measure the difference in results between these two groups. It seems simple enough. It's straightforward. It's rigorous. However, the scientific method is inadequate to measure certain types of phenomena, specifically when it comes to the realm of spirituality. Science is based around the principles of the physical world. It makes an underlying metaphysical assumption that everything is made of matter. The worldview of science is that matter makes up everything. That metaphysical assumption has a difficult time explaining concepts such as spirituality or even consciousness. Therefore, the tools that we have in science, such as the scientific method or clinical experimental trials, are imperfect models when we're trying to explain, study, validate, and even manipulate consciousness and spirituality. Let's consider a different metaphysical assumption to reality, one that does not assume physical matter to be the base building Lego block for everything. Instead of needing to see, measure, or experimentally validate what is and what isn't through science, you can instead understand concepts such as spirituality and consciousness through a lens of simply knowing. This concept of feeling a sense of understanding simply by having an intuitive feeling that you have knowledge of, it's been called different things and comes in different flavors. From ancient pre-Christianity, it was described as a school of thought known as gnosis. More recently, some have tried to explain it through the concept of the placebo effect. Now, the term placebo effect definitely can conjure up some controversy, especially when you're talking about spirituality. Some people might find the term placebo effect to even be a derogatory term, making allusion to the fact that maybe you're talking some sort of fake news. Now, I have to take a moment to stop right here and to state that I am not saying that spirituality is some type of fake news. Rather, I am wanting to juxtapose the concept of spirituality with the concept of science to develop a framework to explain a model that combines these concepts in some form of resonance. So, another lens with which to view the placebo effect is this lens of gnosis, or intuitive feeling and knowledge. The placebo effect has even been studied in modern medicine. I can tell you from my background in studying epidemiology and clinical trial design, as well as having worked on industry-sponsored clinical research with pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer and medical device companies like Medtronic, the placebo effect is an important one. Its effect has to be measured and reported in the final analysis submitted to the FDA before any drug or device is approved for the market. As a physician, I actually utilize and take advantage of the placebo effect every single day when I see and treat patients. The simple act of walking into a patient's room with my white coat on enhances the placebo effect. The way in which I describe a drug or a treatment to my patient can raise or lower the volume on any potential placebo effect. What would it look like to have a model where the rigorous measurement of the scientific method can work in harmony with the intuitive feeling and knowledge championed by spirituality? What I have learned is that a unified model combining elements of science and spirituality, as well as a holistic view on mind, body, spirit, community, and environment, offers a framework that allows for regaining and amplifying resonance in this world. I grew up in a family of immigrants full of doctors. My grandfather earned a living as the village doc in India and Pakistan. He didn't just diagnose medical problems, he also ran his own alchemical dispensary of traditional and herbal medications. My father came to the US to study to become a vascular surgeon. As a kid, the discussions at our dinner table were just as likely to be focused on the risks of the latest robotic-assisted heart surgery as they were the role of turmeric as an anti-inflammatory. So I grew up wanting to become a doctor. I went to the Johns Hopkins University for college. After 4 years, I completed both a bachelor's degree and a master's in public health. Graduating with Phi Beta Kappa honors allowed me to next jump into medical school at NYU. After medical school, I pursued a residency in anesthesiology. I gained a foundational understanding of how the human brain and the human body work when we're awake, when we're asleep, and at various depths of consciousness. I followed up residency with a year of advanced fellowship training in pain medicine. I learned how to dose potentially dangerous pain medications like opioids, cannabinoids, and ketamine. So I was double board certified in 2 specialties and then offered a faculty position at the NYU School of Medicine. I started a position performing one-on-one clinical care, teaching medical students, and conducting clinical research. As I started working, I found a dissonance in what was being published in the mainstream media and the mainstream medical journals from what my patients were reporting and what my own clinical experience was showing me. I started another master's degree, this one in clinical investigation. It allowed me to develop the skills of being able to interpret, analyze, design, and communicate important medical breakthroughs to my patients. I was on an academic treadmill. This intense focus on career development made me ignore my own personal well-being. It was by luck that I then found the practice of yoga. Now, initially, I had a resistance to yoga. In my mind, yoga was something for girls to do in between picking up a pumpkin spice latte at Starbucks and getting their weekly manicure. Or it was this mysterious esoteric practice coming from the ancient mystics and gurus from India. Eventually, yoga became a regular part of my personal wellness regimen. As I started to experience and feel the benefits of spiritual connection taught by the practice, I found myself wanting to go deeper. I spent a few years in various training programs. I traveled back and forth from New York City to a former ashram in the Berkshire Mountains called Kripalu. I learned a ton about guiding spiritual inquiry while on my way to achieving 500-hour certification in yoga and meditation training. I eventually brought these practices into the fold of my clinical practice and research at NYU. I conducted a research project that was a meta-analysis looking at yoga as a treatment for low back pain. I presented the results of my study at an internationally attended conference of anesthesiologists and pain specialists. I now routinely recommend the practice to my patients. Too many people in the medical industrial complex are wrongfully cheated by the system. They are routinely pushed towards pills, prescriptions, and procedures. Some get better, others are devastated. I remember one particular patient. She was 36 years old and started to develop some nagging lower back pain. Her well-meaning primary care doctor set her up for a course of physical therapy and prescribed some anti-inflammatory medications. After a few weeks of treatment, she unfortunately developed a stomach ulcer, which required an invasive endoscopic evaluation of her esophagus and GI tract. Her gut had become too acidic. She was taken off the anti-inflammatory medication, but still being in pain, she was referred to me for an X-ray guided steroid injection. She got relief for a few months after the injection, but then returned to her primary care doctor with lingering symptoms. This time, she was prescribed a powerful opioid narcotic medication called Percocet and referred to a spine surgeon. The next treatment she underwent involved fusing her lower lumbar spine with rods and screws. During the recovery process, her surgeon had to add another powerful opioid narcotic medication, one called OxyContin, into the mix. About 6 months after her surgery, she showed up again in my clinic. She was still in pain, now with rods and screws in her back. On top of that, she was also now addicted to both OxyContin and Percocet, suffering from constipation and simply seeking help. Modern medicine and science had failed her and many of my other patients. I continued looking for alternative options outside of the medical industrial complex. I enrolled in a 1-year-long medical acupuncture training program at Harvard Medical School. More recently, I have been a student at an institution founded by Alan Watts. The school is called the California Institute of Integral Studies. Clinicians and researchers from the Johns Hopkins University, NYU, MAPS, the Usona Institute, and various indigenous lineages all come together to teach the principles of psychedelic-assisted therapy. My path to discovering how modern medicine can mix with wellness has been a winding one. I remain fascinated by how science can find resonance with spirituality. I believe that if you combine modern medicine with wellness and science with spirituality, you can create new tools for healing the ill and bettering the well. To us as a community, I leave you with this question. How do we continue to find future resonance with the diversity of tools that are at our disposal? Thank you.
Fahad, Dr. Khan, thank you so much. It was very informative. I'm wondering,
Thanks, Josh.
there's so much that we could talk about. So I want to start though with this notion of syncretic medicine. And what's your understanding of syncretic medicine, and how might the term apply to your practice or practices?
I have to tell you, I haven't heard the term before that. Syncretic medicine. Please tell me.
Well, my understanding is that it's when we bring together a range of different practices into something new that creates a new framework, as you were speaking to in your video just now. So I'm wondering then maybe how are you looking at that bigger framework right now?
Yeah, I think I hadn't heard the term. It's an interesting term, but I think what it refers to is that there was a lot of talk in the last few decades of expanding the typical physical or biological model with which we look at the body and we look at healing. And people talked about expanding to a biopsychosocial model and became really popular in the 1970s and 1980s. And I learned about that model mainly when in medical school, as well as my fellowship in pain medicine. Upon graduating and learning some of these more, I guess, spiritual practices, such as yoga, meditation, psychedelic therapy, sound meditation, I think that biopsychosocial model is also incomplete. I think that a more holistic model actually looks at the mind, it looks at the body, it looks at the spirit, it incorporates community, and it finds ways to integrate environment as well. And I think that's a much more sort of holistic and complete framework with which we have to sort of move the practice of medicine and healing in general.
So maybe you can speak a little bit to how, when you encounter diagnoses, you apply these different influences. For instance, if someone was coming to you with a problem of circulation in the body, perhaps.
Sure. First things first is that taking a good history, being a good listener is the most important part. Understanding that true healing comes from the person. So regardless of what I diagnose or what treatments I give, if the person doesn't follow through, anything that I try or diagnose or give them, it's probably not going to work. So that's the first thing, is meeting people where they are, using the language that they're comfortable with. So, a circulatory problem for some, perhaps maybe I'm sending a patient for an ultrasound Doppler exam, or I'm checking their blood pressure, checking their pulse. Using a separate model, perhaps the medical acupuncture model, maybe I'm looking at different traditional Chinese or Japanese medical models, looking at the oketsu system, the immune system, the adrenal system, from a separate type of background, maybe from the yogic or the meditative background. We're sort of focusing on what is the person eating, how is the person sleeping, what is their social function like. So I think it depends on listening first, then diagnosing, meeting the patient where they are, and using a unique combination for each person.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It seems like basically you've expanded your palette of medical tools and medical reference points, which makes for much more subtle treatment. I'm wondering, what are some of the medical... Oh, go ahead.
No, what I wanted to say is yes. I've been on a long road, I guess. I've been a bit addicted to school and training, as I talked about. But I think that one of the things that's lacking is that as an individual, you can obviously only learn so much, and we practice medicine, or we practice therapy, or we practice healing in these silos. And what we need to do is figure out a better model that's a more collective model. So healing through community. And each of us comes with our own unique inner healing methods and therapies that we know. But also we learn different things along our path, and different things work for different people. So if there could be, a model that's more of a collective, a co-healing collective type of model, I think that has a lot of potential to change the game for people that are just looking to heal, or people that are looking not only to heal, but people are looking for something more, like transcendence.
Sure. Which, of course, has been reported in a lot of the research trials with some of the psychedelic substances recently. That sense of transcendence, that kind of experience that rates very highly up with marriage or having a child, those kinds of transcendent experiences. Is that something that you feel needs to be kind of commonplace or normalized in people's lifespans? Or is it something that remains compartmentalized for special, unique purposes?
Man, that's a fantastic question. The psychedelic movement was big in the 1960s, and then everything was shut down in 1970 with the Controlled Substances Act that Richard Nixon passed. We are coming to another renaissance in the psychedelic world, and a lot of these substances. What was that?
The post-MAPS age, I should say. Yeah.
Yes. And I think one of the things that the community has learned is that we need to be really careful with how we study and how we bring to people these substances. And I think that the real focus has been on bringing a science-based approach, an evidence-based approach to figuring out what these things work for. And medicine lends itself well to that model, and that's the medicalization model. Now, there's other models that have been proposed that people are pushing for. Another model is just all-out legalization, in making these substances commercially available, so that perhaps there is some sort of supplement market that, like there is now with THC and CBD and supplements. There's a lot of problems with that model. There's another model, regulatory framework that focuses on decriminalization of these substances as well too. So there's a lot of nuance to discussing the legalization versus decriminalization versus medicalization, and we have to be really careful as to how we move forward, because yes, to go back to your question, I do think that there is a role medically, in PTSD, in depression, in OCD, and anxiety. But I think that there could be a greater role, not just in performance enhancement, but these concepts of self-actualization, of transcendence, of exploring consciousness. But we do have to be cautious, smart, and careful about how we move forward.
Yes, absolutely. Beyond psychedelics, are there other medical breakthroughs that you're particularly paying close attention to?
I think psychedelics are the main one. I think that the real excitement is going to come from coupling. So what happens when you do psychedelic therapy, but you combine it with sound meditation? No one has really studied that from a medical perspective yet. What happens when you combine medical wellness with IV vitamin therapy, a proper nutrition program, proper therapy sessions, meditation training for an individual? What happens when you combine that with an ayahuasca ceremony? So I think that the results of adding these evidence-based individual therapies together are not going to be additive. I think it's going to be a multiplicative or an exponential effect.
Yes, that's very exciting for me, and essentializes the kind of syncretic framework I feel like is the discussion here. In terms of, for instance, there's a lot in somatic practices. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Continuum, but it's a movement practice that is, it's almost like a slow spiraling yoga at the bottom of the ocean, but it was created out of traditional movements and provides another kind of pathway during transcendent experiences, psychedelic experiences, that can amplify or multiply the healing benefits, the transcendent benefits, like sound or meditation. I also wonder, are you encountering a lot of work that is aiming to connect people with nature more often or in new ways? Forest bathing, perhaps.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Not enough. not enough. I practice in New York City, so getting to nature is a challenge. But
We got to
personally,
bring the nature to the city.
we need to bring the nature to the city. Absolutely. My wife loves plants, and if I could show you my apartment, there's like trees and all sorts of things that she's got in here. But it helps. It helps not only just to clear the oxygen, but on a spiritual level, it does bring another life energy into our space. So for sure, personally, I've had fantastic experience with bringing nature into my life, and it would be naive to think that nature doesn't have an effect on healing. And I think what's lacking is that integration. There is a concept of something that we are working on, of having a new cutting edge type of center, something that can house all of these different modalities in a local place here in New York. But it also has a component somewhere, perhaps upstate New York, Hudson Valley, where, you can go and have a weekend and do things like forest bathing, do things like horseback riding, do some more meditative nature walks. Combine that eventually also with, an international type of center as well, perhaps somewhere in the Yucatan Peninsula or in the Sierra Nevada mountain range of Colombia. And take advantage of some of the therapies and the modalities that are indigenous to those places. So combining all of that together.
This to me sounds almost like a new kind of, and forgive me because I'm not trying to invoke the wellness industrial complex, but a new kind of lifestyle of health where you have a different rhythm, a seasonal rhythm where you're moving between urban, mountain spaces, traditional spaces, Western spaces, where you're moving between these different environments. You're not getting stuck as much, perhaps. There's actually quite a collective sense of circulation in what you're saying. I like this sense of integration. I do have to ask.
It's so exciting, and it's such an exciting time right now, because not only is it combining, the different places, but I think also being in 2020, realizing what happened with the coronavirus, I have done so much telemedicine the past several weeks now. I think that it's not only combining these different environments, these different places, these different modalities. Also, what we have to do is figure out how to combine technology on top of this stuff. And that will be, I think, a game changer for so much, bringing technology into all of this as well.
Yes, the augmented sense of integrating how we connect through these different technologies. But then I'm sure there are other people who are listening and thinking, my goodness, what about the screens? What about the screens, doctor? Does that mean we're constantly having to reach through screens in order to connect in this post-pandemic world?
Figuring out the way to integrate that is going to be key. There's the downsides of screens, which I'm not going to go into because probably every single person listening already knows that. But what are the positives of screens? The positives are that, I see you for a therapy, and now we want to integrate, and we want to keep a little bit of accountability with the integration. If I can just log on quickly onto a Skype telemedicine session with you, maybe once or twice in that week following, schedule something for another 2 weeks out, where you could be in another country or you could be on the other side of the country, and we can still then check in for a quick visit and see, hey, have you been keeping up with the meditation? Hey, what insights did you pull from that last session? How are you applying those into your daily life? I think those are some of the real key advantages and benefits where technology can be weaved in a conscious way.
Yes, for sure. The convenience of it, the consistency of it can really make a big difference after a big experience in a psychedelic session, when you're able to follow up with a patient or a client for weeks or months afterwards and really build in the integration of those lessons into their daily life, their daily practices. I do have to ask, you brought up the Yucatan. What was it that recently sent you there?
I do go down there quite a bit. Down to my wife is from Colombia, so we spend a decent amount of time there, visiting my in-laws in Cartagena and Bogota and the Sierra Nevadas. And my wife and I actually love Mexico quite a bit. We met in Tulum, and Tulum has a very special place for me personally, but for the both of us. We threw one of our wedding celebrations in a town called Careyes, which is on the Pacific coast of Mexico. So Mexico has a special place in our heart, and I'm also fascinated by a lot of the the healing modalities that come from those places, like temescal, cacao, peyote, yahe. There's a lot to be learned by things that have been indigenous to those areas for thousands of years. Man, the Amazon is still so full and so unexplored. One of the medications we use in the operating room every single day, neuromuscular blockers to keep people from not moving when they're under general anesthesia. That came from curare, the Amanita muscaria mushroom, where yes, we find psychedelic substance from that, but that was also led to the discovery of nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. Belladonna helped us, produce opioids. So, nature and that region of the world have given us a lot of discovery. So there is this magical, mystical, I think, just connection that, and me and my wife personally have to that place as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, so much to learn. Fantastic tools is not the right word, but so much to bring into and back to New York. So that's very exciting. I'm curious. I have this question about anesthesiology, about when in general anesthetics, there's this big question in the consciousness community about what's going on there in the brain, when what's dropping out. It's fascinating to me because generally, even when we're asleep, our consciousness maintains some sense of coherence. Our sensory apparatus don't shut down. But in anesthesiology, there is a different kind of easing off of the senses, as well as a break from kind of time.
Yeah, it's one of the it's maybe my most fascinating mystery of all of medicine is that I'm an anesthesiologist. I have to tell you, I don't know how general anesthesia works. Doctors do not know how general anesthesia works. That's crazy. We've had it around for over 100 years. We use it millions of times a day to safely perform surgery, and yet we still struggle to figure out the molecular mechanism behind how it works. What's really interesting is actually a study that was just published 2 days ago. It's great that we're talking about this. 2 days ago, there was a study that came out of the Scripps Institute, and these researchers basically discovered that the reason why how general anesthetics works is related to their lipids. And what they do in the brain is that they help form these lipid rafts. And in forming these lipid rafts, there are specific molecules that are then released. These molecules, if I remember correctly, one of them works specifically on potassium channels. And I apologize if I'm getting too technical, but basically what it does, by working on those potassium channels, it stops certain neurons for firing. So this is a brand new discovery that these lipid rafts release these chemicals then inhibit neurons from firing, and that disrupts some of the normal electrical brain activity that then helps put you to sleep. I mean, this is a discovery that's going to help us think more not only about general anesthesia, but also probably about how we fall asleep, how we stay asleep. And furthermore, I think it's going to give us some more insights into just consciousness in general. So really exciting, but man, what a mystery of modern medicine is that as an anesthesiologist, I can't tell you how general anesthesia works. That's so crazy.
And yet you've observed probably thousands of times the effects taking hold as well as their relief when they come back. So that must be amazing. It almost must be a kind of a very subtle form of hospice care as you're taking patients in and out of consciousness like that. It's really a beautiful thing.
It is wild. And man, after I started training in yoga and meditation, psychedelic therapy, I started to see the overlap in shamanism. I mean, anesthesiology is at its core is applied pharmacology. We are taking drugs that are poisons that were originally found in nature. We have since figured out what are the active components and we can synthesize them. If you give too little, there's not enough of an effect. If you give too much, they can be fatal. You can kill someone. And man, that's like shamanism. So every single day, every single patient, you're playing with the edge here. You give too little, like someone could be awake during a surgery. You give too much, you could potentially stop their heart or dissociate their brain from their body. So I feel privileged. I feel so lucky to be able to work in something that is so fascinating, so cool, yet so utterly mysterious.
Mm. And what the pharmacology aspect, the Western medical aspect provides us is this rich, deep tradition and case study of trial and error, which is preserved, and we know how so you can apply it very, very acutely per each patient. But also in the shamanistic realm, we have the intuitive, the dream, the symbolic, the mimetic. I'm wondering. It's actually a strange question. I'm wondering where does trauma live across these two, the kind of shamanistic and the Western pharmacological approach? Trauma lives in the body, but also in the soul, in the spirit. Some researchers have even said it exists in a field, both outside of the body that we pass through, or move within. So along with memory as well, but trauma is a form of memory. And I'm wondering, have you encountered this? Yeah.
So I think it's you can look at trauma through different paradigms, and I think you've done a fantastic job of sort of setting up how you can look at it through that sort of shamanistic or intuitive kind of lens where it exists in this field. That field can then interact with your body, your physical body, and there can be literally places that can in the yogic tradition in Sanskrit, they call it granthis, that are knots. And nadis are the energy channels in your body. And, you have to work through these physical knots to then allow the nadis to allow energy to flow through the body. So physically, working through yoga and massage, things like that can help. And that's one way to look at it. Now, the other way to look at trauma, or the other lens, is that medical lens is, where in our memory systems, where in the temporal lobe do these traumatic memories live, and can we go in and explore them and to help unravel them? I think some of the most interesting work in trauma and how trauma gets passed on from one generation to the next, as a part of intergenerational trauma in certain races or certain populations of people. We're starting to find that there's this phenomenon called epigenetics, and where a traumatic situation, like the Holocaust, for instance, or slavery, trauma can get passed through the genome through changes that happen at the DNA level and can then get passed on to subsequent generations. So, I think you can look at trauma through different lenses to try to describe it. And, one of the most interesting things, as far as, if we take the conversation to treatment, is, what's happening with MDMA. and MAPS, which is the nonprofit association that's looking to get approval, FDA approval for MDMA as a treatment specifically for PTSD, just had such robust results in their last set of clinical trials that the FDA gave them special allowance, which they rarely do, to actually fast track the rest of their trials. So that bodes pretty well for something like trauma, specifically PTSD, having another tool with which to treat it, which would be MDMA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really exciting time. And we have a question about, I think this is implicit almost in what you've been saying, but we have a question from our live feed about when will these practices be formally recognized and acknowledged beyond, you're talking about how you're bringing in so many different practices. So I wonder, is it already here? Are we already in this moment of recognition?
Absolutely. I would say yes. I mean, I have patients that come to see me every single day in my pain clinic that ask me about yoga, that ask me about meditation, that ask me about acupuncture. It's just a matter of time until my chronic pain patients start asking me about psychedelic therapy, which actually I don't think anyone is really looking at yet, at least as far as I know. So that's going to be a really interesting frontier that has not yet been looked at. That's super exciting. So those things are here. And I think it depends, to answer that question, it really depends on the audience, right? Like, there's many of us, especially living in a place like New York City, that's maybe a more woke crowd. Yoga. We do yoga. We meditate. We use, Sam Harris's app, and that's normal for people. There's other people that, need to see a scientific study showing that this stuff is, number one, safe, and number two, effective. There's some people that just need the doctor to put on the white coat and to tell them that, yeah, this stuff works. And I feel lucky and I feel privileged to be kind of working at that intersection, because I do believe that these are the things that we need, and these are the things that help a lot of people. And that's what I want. I want to try to bring that to a larger community.
Yeah, I can't wait to see when your clinic in full in its different locations is set up and running and functioning fluidly. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has been a really warm, enlightening, and informative conversation, Dr. Fahad Khan. We really appreciate you joining us on SoundMind.
Thanks, Josh, and thanks, everyone.